Good evening, I'm Mike Knetter. Welcome to the UW Now Livestream series, where we bring you experts from the UW community to talk about timely and important topics. Tonight, we do something a little different. We look inward, and we'll be discussing the future of higher education in Wisconsin, and we'll use the Falling Behind report produced by the Wisconsin Policy Forum as our launching pad for discussion. We provided links to this report in our invitations, and they should also be provided in the live chat in real time this evening. In case you've not seen the report, we'll begin our program tonight with a short video that distills the key points. We'll have three panelists tonight to discuss the future of higher education in Wisconsin. Michael Grebe is the Chief Legal Officer at Advocate Aurora Health and Vice President of the University of Wisconsin's System Board of Regents. Catherine Lyall is an economics professor and former president of the UW system from 1992 to 2004. And Corey Nettles is the Managing Director at Generation Growth Capital and former Wisconsin Secretary of Commerce. We look forward to your remarks this evening, but before we go to our panelist remarks and the Q&A, I'd like to invite Badgers United board member Bob Venable to explain why Badgers United funded this study and highlight some of the key findings. I'll also bring him back for some closing comments as we wrap up tonight. Bob is a graduate of the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences and earned his MBA at the University of Chicago, parlayed his education into a career spanning three great companies, Procter & Gamble, Robert W. Baird, and he is now President and Chief Operating Officer of Charter Manufacturing in Milwaukee. His community work includes serving on the boards of Alverno College, All In Milwaukee, and Badgers United. Bob, thanks for joining us this evening. The floor is yours.
Mike, thank you, and a special thanks to our panelists. As Mike said, I've just got a few brief comments here. First, the why behind the report. You saw some highlights and would encourage you to go to the link and read the full report. But the why behind the report is Badgers United felt strongly that we needed a fact-based, independent, objective view of what's going on in the system, but specifically as it relates to UW-Madison. And really the mission behind Badgers United is we are unabashed believers in and supporters of UW-Madison, and the belief that we can't have a strong state of Wisconsin without a strong UW-Madison campus. And for decades and well over a century, those things have gone together, and there are some very troubling trends, and the report touched on some of them. I think what's interesting about the report is it doesn't just look at UW-Madison relative to itself, but it puts it into a competitive context. And you saw some of those statistics. How is our university doing relative to other leading research institutions? It's a competitive market in the university system, and that affects our competitiveness as a state. So that's really the why behind the report. I would encourage you to read it. A couple of other facts and things that I think we would call out, some of which were shown in that short video. If you'd go to the next slide, please. And again, just more about Badgers United and the role that we hope to play in terms of advancing the conversation and ultimately helping lead to a reversal in some of these troubling trends, which are reflected in the report, and you'll hear more about tonight. The next slide, please. And this is a crane, and you may not be able to see it, but there's a wrecking ball hitting Bascom there, and there's 4 factors, and some of them were touched on in the video, and any of those taken by themselves would be troubling, especially when you look at the decades over which some of these trends have been in place. But collectively, they really do create a crisis and a need for action and a need for change. And we'll touch on COVID as the last of those. We would be here having this conversation with or without COVID. COVID is not the catalyst. It's really an amplification, though, and I think really more brings into focus some of these core issues. Next slide, please. There are so many economic statistics that talk about the impact of the UW. Here are a few of them, but it is not an exaggeration to say that UW-Madison is the core economic engine within the state, and it touches all corners and all aspects of life in the state, economically and otherwise, and certainly there's statistics to back that up. Next slide, please. Multi-decade decline in state support. It's a 2/3 reduction, 42% to 14%. And this would be troubling if it were not for the other what's happened in terms of our tuition freeze. Next slide, please. So while state funding has plummeted, the ability to manage tuition in a competitive way has been taken away through the tuition freeze. And I actually think this chart kind of understates the effect of that in terms of the impact that has. There's only 2 other universities that have a longer running tuition freeze than UW, but both of those have been allowed, the state government has funded that freeze. So again, this combination of declining state funding and the tuition freeze and the inability to go out and bond and access the capital markets really creates an uncompetitive situation for UW-Madison. And then as the next slide shows, just a several $100 million effect from COVID, which is obviously still ongoing as we move forward. So that just frames the issue. Again, I encourage you to read the report and look forward to our panelists' comments. Mike?
Thank you, Bob, for your service to Badgers United and helping drive this report and sharing your key takeaways. As I said, we'll bring you back as we wrap up the show for some concluding thoughts. But right now, I'd like to welcome Corey Nettles, the founder and managing director of Generation Growth Capital, a private equity fund focused on buyouts and providing growth capital to small businesses and lower middle market companies in the upper Midwest. Previously, he served as secretary for the Wisconsin Department of Commerce. Corey is a current board member for several corporate and nonprofit organizations, including United Way of Greater Milwaukee, Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Milwaukee, the Milwaukee World Festival, Teach for America, the Medical College of Wisconsin, the Greater Milwaukee Foundation, and importantly to me, the University of Wisconsin Foundation, as well as a number of other organizations. Corey received his undergraduate degree from Lawrence University in Appleton and his JD from the University of Wisconsin Law School. Thanks for joining us tonight, Corey. The floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike, for that introduction and for your amazing leadership at the UW Foundation, where I have, as you said, the honor of serving on your board for several years now. Obviously, I'm a UW graduate, class of '96 from the law school. And as proud as I was of the UW when I graduated, I didn't really fully appreciate the awesome power of the UW until many years later when I became secretary for the state of Wisconsin. It was during that time, in my first probably 30 days, that I really got introduced to UW-Madison in a different way. I came to understand that it was a juggernaut in terms of the intellectual heft that exists across our campus, the research and development that's being done as an R1 institution, and the federal funds that we attract there on a recurring basis, the amount of research being done there that goes on to be commercialized to create growing and thriving businesses in Madison and across Wisconsin, and quite frankly, across the country and across the world, was certainly an eye-opening experience for me. And then importantly, to see the number of graduates that the UW churns out and how those graduates go on to be leaders of industry all around the world was certainly an education for me. So it was during that time as Commerce Secretary that I really came to appreciate the awesome power and the intellectual heft that existed in the UW that had been cultivated over many, 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 many decades. I also got to see the many economic development forums that the UW used to host, led by friends who became mentors of mine like John Serenas and Tom Hefty and David Ward and so many others, all of which who underscore the importance of this institution to our state. Fast forward many years as a business leader in southeastern Wisconsin, as a board member at the MMAC, one of the largest business chambers in our state. We certainly came to appreciate and to understand the power of UW-Madison to our businesses in southeastern Wisconsin to help grow and strengthen our economy, the brain gain that we gain through our graduates and intellectual power that they possess. As a principal of a private equity firm, I am often reminded and made aware as we buy manufacturing companies in Wisconsin, the upper Midwest. So many of them have connections back to the UW. And then certainly as a member of the Milwaukee community, doing everything I can to close that gap from Milwaukee to Madison and to make sure that our UW-Milwaukee is strong, but also that our UW-Madison is strong. So I certainly am obviously all in on the UW. I am concerned about its future, as well documented in the Falling Behind report commissioned by Badgers United, where I also get to be a board member. And as a citizen of this state, I'm concerned about us not maintaining our preeminent institution as a world-renowned institution, our preeminent position as a world-renowned institution. And I'm mindful of the things that we need to do to get focused to return to our prior preeminence and then do everything we can to project that forward in the future. So thanks again, Mike, for the invitation, and I very much am looking forward to the conversation.
Well, I'm sure our audience will have some great questions for you when you come back, Corey. Thank you for those opening remarks. Our next speaker tonight is economist Catherine Lyall, who was the first female president of the UW system and one of our longest serving presidents from 1992 to 2004. She's known for instituting some of the system's first online courses and degrees, establishing the first annual accountability report card to citizens, prioritizing economic development, and many other achievements. Importantly to me, she's also the author of The True Genius of America at Risk, which looked at trends in public higher education from the perspective of an economist, and that was written about 15 years ago. Catherine received her BA and PhD from Cornell University and an MBA from NYU. Currently, she serves on the board of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching and is a professor of economics at UW-Madison. It's nice to have you with us, President Lyall. Please share your thoughts on the report and what we need to do here to boost UW-Madison.
Thank you, Mike. It's a particular pleasure to be part of your program. And I want to thank Badgers United for funding this very important study. The report brings together the evidence that we have seen bits of over the years, but it brings it all together in one place, and I think in a very useful format. In particular, it enables you to see the interaction among some of the issues that the university is trying to manage, and where perhaps some additional help from the state, alumni, the business community, and so on, could really leverage some movement forward. Bob Venable started by mentioning the absolute critical position that UW-Madison plays in the economic development of this state. And that's absolutely right. UW-Madison is the engine that drives statewide economic development. And I think sometimes we forget that, thinking about Madison just as a Madison issue, but it is really part of a much larger statewide system that reaches every corner of Wisconsin. The report highlights 2 or 3 things that I think are especially important. The first is the slippage of Madison in the national research and development rankings. We still rank in the top 10, but our rank has been declining within the top 10, and we're now 8th, I think. We can't afford to fall any further, and we need to pull ourselves up to the extent that we can. Now, that is a reflection partly of the loss of faculty that you'll see on the charts in the report. UW-Madison's faculty has fallen 7 or 8% over the last decade. And partly that reflects the fact that we pay lower than median competitive salaries for faculty. We need to fix that. And faculty compete for and bring in the vast bulk of the research monies that drive that research engine. So watch those rankings. We need to attend to faculty and make sure that we have a strong faculty for that purpose. The tuition freeze is the second issue that I think is important to be highlighted. The university has had low tuition for years, ever since its founding, compared to its peers. But I don't know any other university that has had its tuition frozen, absolutely frozen, for the last decade. I don't know any business that could operate with frozen prices for a decade. We have to unfreeze tuition, peg it to some reasonable index perhaps, but move that up so that we can keep faculty salaries competitive, attract students, have appropriate student financial aid, and everything else that we need tuition to fund. And then finally, the third point in the report is the importance of getting UW-Madison some management flexibility. Bonding, giving it its own bonding authority is just one of those issues. Most Big Ten research universities have that authority. Letting it control its own tuition is one of those issues. Virtually all of the other Big Ten universities control their own tuition. And so these are issues that are critical at this juncture to Madison's history and to its future. And they are addressable, but we need to get the attention of our elected officials, the public, and say a decade has eroded things quite substantially here, and we need to put some of these things right. So with that, we will see what others have to say.
Thank you, Catherine. You have a great perspective to share, and we look forward to throwing some questions your way in a few minutes. Our next speaker is Michael Grebe, the Chief Legal Officer for Advocate Aurora Health, the largest integrated healthcare system in Wisconsin. He previously served as Executive Vice President and General Counsel for Husco International, and as a partner and executive committee member at Quarles & Brady, providing services in business law, M&A, and corporate governance. And importantly for our purposes tonight, he's also the current Vice President of the University of Wisconsin System Board of Regents. Mike received his undergraduate degree from Dartmouth College and his JD from the University of Wisconsin Law School. Great to have you with us. Michael, and look forward to your comments.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm very grateful that you've invited me here tonight to participate with Catherine, Corey, Bob, and you in this important discussion. The Falling Behind report highlights some essential issues that need to be addressed for the University of Wisconsin, for the system, and for Madison. I won't go through the same items that Catherine and Corey and Bob mentioned, but I think they summarize them very well. I think it's important to note that these are not new issues. These are issues that we've faced for some time, but the time is now to address them. Again, to follow on something that each of the people who spoke before me said, the University of Wisconsin is the most important institution in the state, and the flagship institution is Madison. It's vital to the state of Wisconsin. There is no institution that has more impact on more people across our state, period. It's essential. And it's essential to all of us who are stewards of the institution, whether it's in a formal role or an informal role, to do what we can to support it, to maintain it, and to ensure that it remains the preeminent institution that it is today. So I look forward to our discussion. And again, thank you very much for including me tonight.
Thank you, Mike. We'll take some questions from our audience for our panelists, but let me get things started by asking about something that's come up a few times tonight, and that's tuition. You know, at Madison, you know, I realize that affordability is a big issue for citizens of the state. And not every institution has the kind of philanthropy that we have at Madison, but at Madison, we've been able to deliver something called Bucky's Tuition Promise, where we've committed every student whose family is at or below the median income in the state will receive a package that ensures that 4 years worth of tuition and fees are covered by the institution. And given that, it is hard for me to understand what the argument would be for continuing to hold tuition down at Madison, because, you know, it's basically handicapping the ability of the institution to maintain its quality, which is really important to the return on investment. So I don't understand the rationale for this. And in fact, that limitation on our resources probably limits access because it keeps us from growing. So I get that the state might not have money to give to us right now, but surely you would think we could increase tuition for those who can afford it. So I guess I'll throw that first to Mike Grebe, and then if Catherine and Corey want to chime in.
So I would say two things in regard to that. First, I speak for myself, but I think I'm also speaking for the integrity of the Board of Regents in saying we agree that there should be a rational tuition setting policy for the University of Wisconsin, and that includes lifting the freeze. Catherine mentioned earlier, perhaps there need to be some sort of guardrails around tuition increases in the future, and I think that very well may be the case. But it's vital that we are able to manage tuition in a rational, reasonable way, and we can't do that right now. One other thing I'd mention is that affordability for college does not consist only of tuition. Tuition is an aspect of affordability, but it's not the only one. In some instances, it's not even the most important one. Chancellor Blank delivered a presentation to the Board of Regents last week where she highlighted the fact that Madison is driving down year to degree, years graduation in a way that leads among many of our peer institutions. Permitting people to finish college on time, on their timetable, has more to do with affordability, in my view, than tuition. And if we're able to deliver on that promise, we ought to be able to manage tuition as well. I couldn't agree more with the Falling Behind survey on that point.
Catherine?
Well, I think Mike's put his finger right on it. The tuition freeze essentially subsidizes those who can pay in order to help those who can't pay. Having a more rational tuition policy would enable the university to charge a little bit more to those who can afford to pay. And we've seen in the report that our tuition now is well below our peers. So it could go up modestly and still be very affordable in comparison to peers. And at the same time, do things like the Bucky Promise, which enables those who can't afford to pay to come to UW-Madison. A freeze is a blunt instrument that punishes everybody. And I think if we can get people to understand that it's not just the price you pay for something, it's the quality you get for it that matters. Then they begin to think about price and tuition in relation to the quality of that education. And I think most people would say they'd rather pay a little bit more to have a good quality education than to have a cheap one in every sense, cheap in quality as well as cheap in price. So tuition is an issue that requires a good deal of attention now, and it goes beyond just well, it'll feel good if we freeze it for another biennium, and the university will figure it out somehow.
Corey, anything to add on this?
Yeah, I guess to maybe put a sharper point on it, you know, these tuition freezes may be good bumper sticker politics for the legislators back home, but it's really bad policy. None of us, I've been a director of public companies, of private companies, of big nonprofits, and of small nonprofits. And we got to get out of the way. As a director, my job is to get out of the way and to let management run their business. They know the business better than I do. They know their consumers better than I do. They know the market better than I do. They know the levers that they have to pull better than I do. And ultimately, they're responsible, they're accountable to their customers, to their consumers. So to have legislators artificially freezing the tuition at a rate that has no connection to market, that has no connection to value, that has no connection to price, is a really bad policy. And whether it's the tuition freeze or other ways that the legislature is hamstringing the university, we can't have this place be the preeminent institution that it is if we don't take off these handcuffs and let it function in the competitive marketplace that is higher education. So I get that back home, they might feel good. They've stuck at the university and taken the price down, but this is no way to run a business. It's certainly no way to run one of the most well-regarded academic institutions in the country.
Those are three great perspectives on that question. You know, I worry we're victims of our own success to a degree. You know, we've weathered a lot of budget challenges over the years, but you know, I just want to remind people that, you know, initially when we saw the bigger cutbacks in state funding, the first thing that happened was they dialed up tuition significantly in the decade of the 2000s. And then as we hit this freeze, for a period of time, we dialed up the out-of-state tuition substantially, and then finally the out-of-state enrollment. We held the in-state enrollments constant, and we grew out-of-state. And that game is over. We're at capacity, and this institution relies on a foundational budget of state support and tuition dollars that pays for the base operations, upon which we bring in all these research grants and philanthropy to make it excellent. And we can't afford any longer to not have growth in that base budget. Got a question from Charles Johnson that I'm going to direct to Catherine Lyall first, and that is, what does the university need to do to increase rankings in research?
Well, the first thing it needs to do is restore its faculty numbers to the levels they were at a decade ago or so. We've, as the report shows, we've lost about 8% of the faculty over the last decade. And the reason that's important is that the research money that comes to the university and our ranking in those national rankings is almost exclusively the result of the competitiveness of the faculty for research grants from federal sources, from private foundations, from companies, and other revenue sources. You don't have a competitive faculty, you don't rise in the rankings. It's just that simple. And we've had, because of our lagging faculty salaries at Madison for more than a decade now, we've had raids on the faculty. And of course, other universities that raid our best money getters, not our worst ones. And so in order to address the rankings issue, we need to pay attention to faculty numbers and salaries. That is sometimes not a very politically popular thing to do, but it is the driver that makes most of the difference between whether we rank 8th or 5th or 25th in the nation.
Yeah, it's amazing. You know, a few years ago when I looked at the data, the difference between being number 3 in the country in attracting federal support and being number 13, which both sound pretty good. We're all used to rankings in football, but that was about $200 million a year coming into the state of Wisconsin over what the 13th ranked program was attracting in federal research dollars. And, you know, that's a lot of money coming into the state. And, you know, I always remind people, you're right, Catherine, it's good politics to be low cost and, you know, but at the end of the day, we don't set the wage rate for faculty in the global market. We choose the quality of faculty we're going to have.
That's right.
And, you know, we're a price taker, and it's important to recognize that. Question for Cory. You know, you most recently worked in state government, I think, of anyone on our panel. And, you know, one of the things that comes up a lot right now is, why doesn't UW-Madison have bonding authority? You know, we're the only flagship in the country that doesn't have it. And I don't understand what the roadblock is to that. And maybe you could explain to our audience why that hasn't happened in Wisconsin, at least in your estimation. And then I'll ask Regent Grebe to comment on that as well.
Well, I wish I could provide a logical, rational answer for why that's true, but I can't. I cannot. There's no reason why the UW should not have bonding authority. Other higher ed institutions in our state, public and private, including some of our technical colleges, have bonding authority. So other than maintaining very tight control, stifling control over the UW, I don't know what the good policy answer is from limiting its bonding authority. It certainly has the balance sheet and resources that it would be a strong credit were it allowed to go to the market for financial support. So there's no good argument. I don't know if the legislature argues that there's some economies of scale or efficiencies that are gained in doing the bonding through DOA. From a cost of capital perspective, I would be suspicious of that argument. I hear the same kinds of arguments as it relates to controlling, you know, projects on campus. I'd say let that go and let that loose too. So I don't know what the policy argument is, other than this broader overarching sense that control must be maintained over the UW. And as I said earlier, I think that's a very bad policy position.
Mike Grebe, any thoughts on that bonding authority?
Well, my first thought is that I'm sorry for my Wi-Fi connection problems earlier. I hope that everybody can hear me better now.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Cory summed it up well. This is an essential tool that virtually every other university in the country has as a way of managing its business and its fiscal health. Again, something Chancellor Blank talked about last week. As a result of COVID, and Bob Venable pointed this out in one of the early slides, Madison had a shortfall of about $320 million. Any other institution could fund that, could deal with that with short-term borrowing, with bonding in some fashion. We can't. We are the only institution in the Big Ten that can't, and it is a real limitation on our ability to manage things in an effective way. I think Corey is absolutely right. It's a tool that everybody else has. It's a tool that we ought to have, and it will make for a better, sounder, stronger University of Wisconsin system in Madison. No question about it.
We have to find a way to ratchet up the pressure for that. Great question coming in here. Does a good quality education lead to a good quality job, which will allow the student to pay off the tuition that they pay? Do we need greater support after graduation to land a great job? And, you know, one thing I will say, I know I just saw the facts today as reported by the chancellor in her remarks, and I think 54% of our undergraduates last year graduated debt-free. And I know as of a few years ago, the median level of debt for those who had debt, so of the 46%, was something in the high $20,000s of dollars. So what some people might spend on a new car, which probably is a pretty good ROI that you're getting on that investment in your career. But what is the link between a good quality education and good jobs? And I guess maybe Catherine Lyall, will start with you and go around the horn. Just thoughts on that. Is it still a good deal to get a degree from UW-Madison?
Oh, absolutely. And, if a student were to graduate with $25,000 in debt, the differential in their income between having a UW degree and having only a high school diploma would pay off that debt in about 3 years, maybe faster. So that is certainly an investment worth making, even if you have to borrow for it at our levels. Does a good education guarantee you a good job? No, but it certainly raises the odds. And a poor education or only a high school diploma will guarantee that you're frozen out of lots of opportunities that you otherwise would have with a college degree. And studies over and over nationally show this as well as in the state. Many years ago, I remember making a Rotary speech. And at the end of my speech, somebody stood up in the back and said, President Lyall, I've always figured that if the state couldn't provide a good job for my kids, at least they could provide a good education. And I thought that's a good way to look at that. Not that the state shouldn't strive to provide good jobs for people, but it's not an either or. It's an education that gives you opportunities in the state and out of the state as well.
Let me just add a little dimension to this question for Mike Grebe. One of the things that happened in philanthropy this year at UW is the School of Education had a campaign they called Impact 2030, and one of the pillars of that campaign was debt forgiveness for students that got a degree from the School of Education and I think take teaching jobs in the state of Wisconsin, which is a wonderful program and a great idea. But it sort of raises the issue, should there be more tuition variability across institutions in the system and maybe even within the schools and colleges within a campus that links a little more closely to the return that students might expect in the workforce from degrees in different fields?
Well, I think some of that exists now, where there are certain schools, and especially certain graduate schools, that have quite varied tuition. But what I think you're talking about is, should we have variable tuition at the undergraduate level? I think that that's part of a rational tuition policy, where tuition at Madison might not be the same as tuition at pick another one of the campuses statewide. And we ought to recognize that there ought to be and will be different tuition levels at those schools. I think Catherine's point, however, if I can go back to that for a moment, is really excellent. There are very few more beneficial investments that anybody in the state of Wisconsin can make than an investment in a University of Wisconsin education, including especially Madison. There's no question that the data proves that that is going to develop a great return on investment. And we ought to encourage people to make that investment.
Cory, thoughts? Do we do enough to get our students great jobs? Are we giving them all the possibilities they could get with their degree?
Obviously, you can always do more. I know our career counseling and placement people all across our system are doing a darn good job. They're trying really hard. They're all trying to get better at how do they close that gap between the university and the employer. They're doing better outreach. I get a lot of outreach from some of our schools at UW-Madison, both undergraduate and graduate, for internships and for postgraduate placement. So there's always more you can do. The UW Nation of alums out there is strong and active and supportive of our graduating students, I think, by and large. So there's always more you can do, but I think we're doing a really good job. And I think the ROI of a degree from UW is very, very high. Compared to being a high school graduate or from some of these other schools that are private online schools where kids come out with a lot more debt. They don't even complete their degree. We are a tremendous value on a relative basis by any measure.
If I may, Mike, I might add one thought to that. That has to be a two-way street. And I think over the last several years, the system has made efforts through All In Wisconsin and other programs to do that. It's important for us to approach business owners, business leaders, job creators, people who are going to create those opportunities for our graduates, and be sure we're listening to them and asking, what is it that you need? What do you need us to produce, and how can we encourage students to go into areas that are going to have an excellent job opportunity at the end of them? I think that dialogue back and forth is essential at each campus, at Madison, and across the system.
I just took a poll of our audience, and they agree 100% that we should have higher tuition at UW-Madison. Signe Osby asked the question of the hour, which is, how do we persuade legislators to lift the freeze? I was in a board meeting today, and a dean from Harvard is on this group, and he said, we often make the mistake of thinking we need to persuade people with rational explanations, and in fact, decisions are made based on feelings, identity, and reason. I think that's probably true. In light of that, what is the best way? Well, maybe it's made because of financial incentives as well. So what could we do to break this logjam and unfreeze tuition? Your best thoughts. Corey Nettles first.
Yeah, so, politicians, elected officials respond to the squeakiest wheel. And if the people in their districts are squeaking about the cost of Madison and it being too high, and it being inaccessible, you get to things like a freeze. If the alums and stakeholders and supporters of UW start banging on them and squeaking louder, saying this institution's preeminence is at risk, you need to unshackle them and let them manage their business more effectively, I think they will respond to that. So I would encourage UW alums and everyone who's a friend and supporter of the UW to light up the phones of the legislators in your district. Tell them that you want to see UW set free. You want to see the tuition freeze raised. You want to see them have the flexibility that they need to run their business in a competitive marketplace, and to stop meddling. We're as Regent Grebe said, we're of the top 10. we're exceptional in the lack of tools that we have. That's not a good thing. So I think legislators and elected politicians respond to people who bang on them. So I'd say the Friends of the UW need to start getting loud and noisy and start banging on people. That'd be the number one thing I'd ask people to start doing immediately.
That's good advice, and this one happens to be, I think, a bipartisan issue, because I think Democrats and Republicans are happy to freeze our tuition right now.
Yeah.
Catherine, your thoughts?
I'd only add to, I agree, light up the lines. But I'd only add to that I think we have to remind people that the other thing they care about, which is access to the university, is at issue here. If legislators want their constituents to be able to get their kids into UW-Madison, they need to think about how the funding works and whether a tuition freeze may be reducing those opportunities and not increasing them. Access, I think, in my experience, is something that people, rank and file voters, care about in this state. And they ought to help us make legislators care about that as well.
Mike Grebe?
Everything that Cory and Catherine just said. I might add one other element to this. One of the things that has to be done in order to obtain a rational tuition policy is for the University of Wisconsin and its leaders to demonstrate responsibility in terms of stewarding and managing the funds of the UW system and each of the campuses, including Madison. If the legislature or the governor doesn't believe that we are going to be able to effectively and responsibly steward those funds, they're not going to give us the tools to use them. I would argue that over the last several years, we've done that. We've done that in a number of ways, whether it's revenue balances or other aspects. I think we've established that we can be trusted with those tools. But that's admittedly, I think, a fundamental part of asking for the additional tools, including a rational tuition policy.
That's a great point. You know, we have to demonstrate that we're good stewards. I always remind people, though, you know, our provosts will leave and go be president of Rochester University or other places where they have that authority, and, you know, they can do this. I think it's time. And, you know, I would just add one other thing that, you know, I know politics is a retail business. It's also a money business. And the next Wisconsin PAC exists for a reason, to try to influence politics in the state. And, you know, people who think that that's the way to change things, that exists for that purpose. Question came in. Someone mentioned, well, enrollment's down 13%. Is that less students applying, or is Madison turning away more in-state students? I will just say that enrollment decline is system-wide. That's not at Madison. Madison's enrollment is growing, and our application volume was up 17% this year. So we are more popular, hotter than ever, and that excess demand is just another signal that we are underpriced. Question from Richard Arnold: what role should our U.S. senators have in attracting funds for research at UW? Catherine, you want to take that? You probably thought about it.
Our U.S. senators in the past and currently often help alert us to research competitions and opportunities. The university has been on record for a long time as opposing sweetheart set-asides from federal funding for the university, because that gets you into a race to the bottom with your peers around the country. When we compete fairly for federal funds, we win a lot. And I think that's the way to go. But certainly our senators can alert us to opportunities coming up. They can sometimes adjust the funding for those competitive programs. the funding for NIH, NSF, and so on is obviously something they vote on as senators. And just get them to understand how important that is to their home state as well as to the industry of higher education in general.
Thank you, Catherine. One of the things I think we're all aware of is that the United States economy, a lot of the dynamism and growth and wealth creation evolves around what people call these knowledge-intensive companies, often at the intersection of information technology, connectivity, et cetera, and also increasingly in the life sciences. And to what extent does a great research university really provide the foundation and platform for that kind of dynamism? And do we see that happening in Madison and around the state, around our universities? Corey, why don't you start on that one?
Yeah, I mean, Madison is filled with startup companies that have gone on to be successful companies that are extremely well regarded leaders in their space across the country and some places around the world. That technology transfer and commercialization of ideas out of the UW that get seeded in small startup businesses that have the ability to grow and scale is a well-known pattern in Madison and in Wisconsin. I was on a forum like this the other day with Kevin Conroy, who's the leader of Exact Sciences, which is an amazing business, and the science that fueled his technology and his product and the color guard test came out of UW. And we've got vitamin B research that's been well commercialized to the great benefit of the university. So that is part of the awesome power of the UW. And this is a place where we punch above our weight class. The research that we're doing and the technology transfer and the commercialization and the businesses that get grown and scaled in Madison beyond coming out of the UW is quite significant. If you go to the UW Research Park, when I came into Commerce in 2003, and I look at how much that place has grown and is bustling at the seams, and the number of businesses that we have across our state that have grown, that are spin-outs from the UW and from the research there, it is just remarkable and impressive. And these are also jobs that are extremely high-paying jobs, well above the median in our state. So they're exactly the kind of knowledge-based, good, clean jobs that we want in this economy to help us continue that transition from a Rust Belt economy to a knowledge-based economy. So UW is really punching above its weight class there on a peer basis nationally.
Mike Grebe, anything you care to add to that?
Well, I think Corey said it well, and I'm not sure I can add much to it. Kevin Conroy was very persuasive and compelling when he spoke the other day on this topic, and he put it in an interesting way. He said a business like his or others are going to settle in probably one of two places: a very large metropolitan area with access to millions of people, or somewhere that has the facilities, capabilities, and opportunities that the University of Wisconsin at Madison does. It attracts substantial benefits, jobs, revenue, income, all sorts of good things.
Yeah, I think he mentioned, Epic Systems, Exact Sciences, Promega, all very young companies, very dynamic, very successful, large employers. And I would even add to that, a company that's been around for a long time, American Family Insurance. It's not your father's insurance company anymore. They are a technology and data-driven business, and they have deep partnerships with the university. And that focus on being a data-intensive company is part of what has driven their recent growth. Question from the audience. I've not heard anything about the trajectory of Wisconsin household incomes to understand how much we're asking from them when we want more from them, and do they really see tangible benefit? And I think just at the outset, I would say, I don't know that we're asking for more state dollars. I think President Thompson's budget request may ask for more state dollars. I don't know that UW-Madison is necessarily clamoring for that. We may want more flexibility, but anyone care to tackle that? What's going on with household incomes in Wisconsin and why? Catherine, do you have thoughts about that?
Well, Wisconsin incomes are growing, but more slowly than many other states. And I think that's part of the impetus for some of our elected officials to want to keep tuition frozen. But on the other hand, our tuition relative to those median incomes through the Badger Promise means that if you're making the median income in this state, which is the average income, you won't pay any tuition and fees. So I think there's been a good faith effort, more than a good faith effort on the part of the university to recognize the slower growth in incomes in this state and the need that puts on families for financial aid and assistance. That can't go on forever, but it is certainly an effort that I applaud, and I hope that that people who think about the income in this state realize that tuition is scaled to that at Madison. Now, the other thing I'd say about all that, of course, is if you want to grow the income, the average income in the state, you need to have a better educated, more skilled workforce. And that's the business we're in. So thinking that somehow by reducing opportunities for higher education, we're going to make incomes grow faster is magical thinking. In fact, it works the other way around.
Great perspective. Mike?
I'd add maybe just a couple thoughts, and I agree with Catherine. One, I'd go back to the idea that affordability of education includes things other than just tuition. But it is imperative that those of us who are responsible for the UW system are good, responsible stewards of the funds, the taxpayer funds that we're entrusted with. One way to think about this, and some of my colleagues would find this tiresome to hear me say it again, if you take the average family of four tax burden, if the University of Wisconsin wastes $1 million, that's the entire tax burden for the city of Crivets for the entire year that's been wasted. It is imperative that we are good stewards of the funds that we are entrusted with. One of the reasons, however, that the University of Wisconsin is a good investment for the state and for the taxpayers around the state is not just because of the jobs that get developed, although that's very important. At the beginning of the last century, Charles Van Hise basically created the Wisconsin idea by saying he would not rest until the beneficent influence of the universities was felt by every family across the state. One of the things Tommy Thompson and a number of, well, the entire Board of Regents talks about right now is how do we create the new Wisconsin idea, the updated Wisconsin idea for this century. And I think there are a lot of ways that we can do that. And a lot of them spring out of Madison. You can look at the history and in the past and current history of dairy farming to see an absolutely vital impact that the university has had on the state that isn't just creating jobs. Right now, there is an effort to educate more teachers. We have a severe teacher shortage in the state of Wisconsin, and the University of Wisconsin is working to find ways to educate and train more teachers that we can send throughout the state who can help communities everywhere. That's not just creating jobs, but it is improving the lives of the citizens of the state of Wisconsin through the efforts of the university. That's one of the places where there is great, great influence and impact that we can create here.
Thank you, Mike. Well, we're at the top of the hour, and I do want to bring Bob Venable back on. So I would like to thank the three of you for joining us tonight, sharing your very different perspectives on this great institution. This is not a conversation that by any means is ending tonight, but it's been our honor to really convene your collective expertise and hear your thoughts tonight. I'd like to invite Bob Venable back on from Badgers United. We've had a lot of questions from the audience about what can they do, how can they help, and you've probably seen those come in, Bob. I'd love your thoughts on that. What can people do to help us break the logjam?
I just want to first thank Mike and for you and your moderation of this panel and the panelists for helping bring their perspective and expertise to the issue. Corey summed it up well. The facts are clear. There's not really two sides to the argument. The facts are clear. We understand what the issues are, and we understand what the actions need to be to solve this, to reverse course and get Madison back on the right trajectory. And it's a political issue. And so if you're a supporter or an advocate of Wisconsin, that's an outreach. And what we're looking for, you heard the message is very clear. It's unfreezing tuition and the financial flexibility to be stewards of the financial path forward, through bonding. And I think that's clear. So if you're an advocate, that's what we need from you is, as Corey said, we need you to be loud, and we need you to reach out and help repeat and project this story. The policy form study is a great resource in that it tells the story. If you're a legislator, we need you to act and keep Wisconsin exceptional by removing the exceptions. As we said, we're not asking for anything. We just want to be treated as all other universities, and including research universities are in the country. We're not asking for anything unique. We want to stay exceptional, but what we're asking of them is as basic gets, and we need them to see the big picture. And again, Corey did a great job of talking about what that process looks like and how to bring change to bear.
Thank you, Bob. It's great to have you with us tonight. Thanks for your work again at Badgers United. I hope we've got a few more people in our audience interested in supporting your mission, and I look forward to working with you in the days ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, we've talked a lot about it tonight, but I would just kind of recap this by saying what everybody wants from higher education is really three things. We'd all love to have affordability, access, and excellence. And doing all three of those things at the same time is very difficult. And to some extent, the institutions throughout the system focus in on those different points of that triangle to different degrees. And at Madison, I think our calling card has really been our excellence, along with a strong commitment to affordability and access. And that commitment to access is as strong as it's ever been. We have our largest in-state population in our freshman class right now. We've committed to maintaining the number of in-state students in the freshman class in spite of declining state high school graduation rates. Affordability, we're doing everything we can. As you've heard, Bucky's Tuition Promise ensures that students from families with below median income can go 4 years at UW-Madison, tuition and fee covered. And the thing that's at risk right now is excellence. And I have to say, to some extent, affordability and access aren't so hard. You can charge a low price and you can let a lot of people in. The question is, how good can you be? And excellence is hard to achieve. And the taxpayers of this state have built it over centuries. And it's on us to maintain that now. And we have to rebuild the partnership that's made this university great. In a different way, in a new environment, but it's really excellence that's on the line here. And I will tell you, when great institutions lose their position in excellence, you get a reputation, and it's very hard to rebuild it back. It's a lot cheaper to keep it than it is to rebuild it. So hopefully we can make some progress on this issue, and the Badgers United funded report by the Wisconsin Policy Forum can get us on our way. So thank you all for joining us this evening. It's been fun to sift and winnow really at the foundation of what makes the university great. I hope this program can motivate some of us to do more in this regard. It's been very useful for me to communicate with a number of the people involved with this study, and I'm going to get more personally involved in this myself. It's very important to our donors that all the stakeholders are doing what they can to support this university. So feel free to Go look at some of our old programs on our YouTube channel, the Wisconsin Alumni Association YouTube channel. Please subscribe to it, and we'll be back again next week with another edition of the UW Now. Thank you, and on Wisconsin.